I'm sitting here with Dr. Dawson Church, author of Genie in Your Genes, and more recently, Mind to Matter, amongst many other books. And also, you're the creator of EFT Universe. So you just did an exercise with me on EFT. Can you tell me what it is?
EFT is a great combination of three techniques: exposure therapy, cognitive therapy, and acupressure. And so with EFT, you think about something bad that happened in your life, either a long time ago or recently, and you then, while thinking about that, you then tap on a series of 13 acupuncture points, like this over here. And acupuncture works the same way as acupressure. And so this act of tapping on those acupressure points helps reset your energy body. Now, when you do that while you're thinking of a bad thing, it neutralizes the emotional impact of that bad thing. So when we hook people up to an EEG or an MRI and have them think about, say, for example, a bad childhood event that really impacted them, they may have PTSD, they may have had an adult event that had a severe traumatic impact on their lives. When they think about that, the emotional brain, the midbrain, gets all lit up, gets really activated. The hippocampus, the thalamus, the amygdala, all those parts of the brain get highly activated by recalling a trauma. But when you tap, it sends a second signal to your brain of safety, because you're now tapping and you're basically telling your body, I'm safe. So it breaks the association between that traumatic memory and the fight or flight response. So even though you may have thought about that memory 100 times in the past or 1,000 times in the past and got into fight or flight every time, after you tap, what research shows is your emotional midbrain is quiet. You're thinking about the memory, but it's no longer attached to that emotional trigger. You're no longer going to fight or flight. And we've done this now with veterans, many, many veterans, over 20,000 veterans, Vietnam veterans, World War II veterans, Korean War veterans. And we find that when we do that with them, they still remember all the bad stuff from those events that they witnessed, but they're now calm. One veteran we did this with, he said that after EFT, he got his first night's sleep since Vietnam. He'd woken up an average of once an hour every night since Vietnam. He had nightmares, he had flashbacks during the day. And in my book, The EFT Manual, I tell his story. And after his very first EFT session, he said, I went home, I slept through the night, the very first time since Vietnam. So it's powerful at removing those emotional tags that otherwise accompany those memories. You still have the memory, but it's no longer one that causes you emotional distress.
What I love about your work, Dawson, is that you are providing real practical methods to help us deal with negative emotions. It seems to me that's what trips us all up. Why is it so tough to deal with the bad stuff?
Well, if you think about your ancestors 100,000 years ago, 500,000 years ago, it was highly useful for them to think about the bad stuff. So imagine yourself, say, for example, after the last ice age in Europe, as the ice sheets retreated, the peninsulas became inhabitable, but now there were Cro-Magnons there were Neanderthals there were all kinds of other creatures who wanted to eat you, or you needed to find sources of food, they were competing with you. What did you do? It was highly adaptive, highly useful for our brains to think about that tiger that we saw yesterday and the tiger we might see tomorrow that might eat us. So it was really useful for our brains to focus relentlessly on the bad stuff. Now it's not so useful, but that's the whole way our brains are wired. Whenever you start thinking about the bad stuff, whenever you start thinking about things that could hurt you in the past or things that might hurt you in the future, then your brain is doing its job of keeping you safe. Except that now we're not in the middle of an ice age. There are no tigers around. There are no threats. We aren't being competed with by other groups. The people from Santa Rosa are not about to attack those in Petaluma over here, or vice versa. So we have all this brain equipment, all this hard wiring to deal with threats and no threats. So it just spins endlessly on the insult that my cousin gave me at last month's family reunion, or the report that's overdue on my boss's desk, or the thing my wife said to me, or my kids, how they may have got a B rather than an A in their grades. All this evolutionary equipment is now focused on stuff that's trivial, and it drives us crazy, drives our anxiety and depression sky high, and it has huge effects on our health. In one famous study called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, the researchers found that people who had adverse childhood experiences, bad things in their childhood, they had higher rates at 50, 55 years old of anxiety, depression, obesity, heart disease, cancer. So it has a big negative effect on your body long term, unless you can liberate yourself from those negative emotions.
Do you think there's intrinsic value to the negative charge? i.e., do we evolve through crisis, both individually and collectively?
Do we evolve through crisis? And crises can help us, spur us to change. But what I really encourage people to do is find a place for self-love. So maybe it has taken a crisis to get you to move out of old destructive habits, but then you want to move towards self-love. Those old destructive habits are not self-love. They're usually born out of a lack of self-confidence, lack of self-esteem, or even self-hatred. I once worked with a group of women who were obese. And as they told me the stories in their head, what they were trying to do was force themselves to change, to quit their behaviors by harsh self-talk. But that is the underdog, top dog model of change. One part of your psyche is trying to hammer another part of your psyche into change. So top dog is saying, you should quit smoking. Top dog is saying, you should not be having that pint of ice cream at 10 p.m. at night. You should not be having that glass of wine. You should not be acting in this way. So top dog is always barking orders at underdog. Now, underdog strategy is very interesting. Underdog rolls over and plays dead and says, top dog, you are so wise. You are so right. I should not have that cigarette. I should not have that drink. I should not eat that third piece of chocolate cake. So underdog is always agreeing with top dog. But the moment top dog's back is turned, underdog sneaks out and lights up the cigarette or eats the third piece of chocolate cake, whatever it might be. So in this battle in the psyche between top dog and underdog always wins the battle. We keep on repeating these behaviors over and over and over again. They go from being soft wiring behavior in our brains to being hard wiring, actual neural pathways in our brains. And it's really hard for people to change as a result. And so what you want to do is break that dynamic, that struggle between top dog and underdog. And you do it through energy. You change the energy of the whole system. When you change the energy and break that tension, all of that energy trapped in that top dog, underdog dynamic in the psyche is available for change. So we have people tap and say, I want to eat that piece of pie. I want to smoke that cigarette. I want to have that thing. I want to do that thing that I know I should not do. And I love myself anyway. And when you fill that space in your head with self-loving messages, self-nurturing messages, a lot of those compulsions just go away. We hooked people up in one study, a colleague of mine hooked people up to an MRI. These were, again, obese women. And when they were looking at pictures in the MRI of foods they craved, their whole emotional midbrain was all lit up. But when they were back in the MRI after treatment, they looked at those same images and their emotional midbrain was no longer engaged. They were totally calm. In fact, the radiologist who was operating the MRI said to my colleague, what have you done to these women? I can't believe it. They were here in the MRI just a few weeks ago, and their whole emotional midbrain was lit up. The craving system was all lit up, and now it's not there anymore. So that's the miracle of these energy techniques. They help defuse that tension in the psyche between top dog, that coercive model of change, and now you're just changing and loving good things because you love yourself and you're doing things that are good for you.
Is that underdog dynamic then contributing towards addictions that we see so prevalent in our society today?
It is, and people try and change by using top dog to get underdog to shape up. So it's trying to make underdog quit. But these are pleasurable things. They generate dopamine in the brain's dopamine reward system. They generate serotonin, another feel-good chemical. So there are all these chemicals we're getting from our addictive habits that feel good, which makes them, again, very hard to break.
Yes. You were talking to me earlier about meditation as another potential methodology to use to combat addiction, and using all of these chemicals that are naturally produced in the body anyway.
Yeah, and I was saying that you aren't addicted to alcohol, you're addicted to dopamine, because things like cocaine generate that same kind of response in the brain that our own dopamine does. It activates the brain's dopamine reward system. But we have The only reason that addictive substances work is that they have molecules that have the same characteristics as endogenous molecules our bodies produce. And meditation produces all of these endogenous molecules. For example, THC is the active molecule in marijuana. It docks with certain receptor sites in the brain and makes us feel high and makes us feel good. But the receptor sites it docks with are the same as those that dock with anandamide. And anandamide is what's called the bliss molecule. Ananda is the Sanskrit word for bliss. So when I'm smoking a joint, I'm getting the same kind of high I get when I have my body's own anandamide in those receptor sites. For example, serotonin is basically our natural substance that's an analog to psilocybin, which is the active thing in magic mushrooms. Magic mushrooms, those psilocybin molecules are docking with our serotonin uptake system in our brain, making us feel good. Ayahuasca, same thing. Cocaine, the same thing. All of these are docking with endogenous sites in the body that we have molecules in our brains that can dock with. So when you meditate, you then generate huge amounts of oxytocin, you generate lots of anandamide, you generate another neurotransmitter called nitric oxide, you generate norepinephrine, a performance-enhancing neurotransmitter, serotonin, dopamine, and you're getting them all in the perfect doses created by your own brain. You can't overdose on them. And so what people who are addicted are trying to get is those same pleasure chemicals, but they think they come from out there. And they don't have to come from out there. They can come from right here, just triggered by shifts in consciousness. When you meditate, when you breathe deeply, when you tune to non-local mind, when you have a sense of oneness with the universe, your brain is making oxytocin and norepinephrine and nitric oxide and serotonin and dopamine and anandamide all endogenously, and you wind up feeling wonderful after the right kind of deep meditation. So we think we're addicted to all these things out there. We just don't know. We can make them all right in here simply with our own consciousness.
Wow.
Mind to matter.
Mind to matter. I'm going to turn to my inner pharmacy, the chemical producing machine in my body.
Yeah.
Now, if this works on an individual level, will it work on a mass level to have a mass collective shift in consciousness too?
In Mind to Matter, I talk about research, several pieces of research showing that we human beings are attuned to the planet, we're attuned to the solar system, we're attuned to huge cycles. For example, there are solar flares that flare up frequently, and so the sun produces solar flares. That changes the solar wind that's rushing past the Earth at something like 3 million kilometers a second. It's going past pretty fast. And those solar flares distort the Earth's natural geomagnetic fields. And the research shows that people who are in heart coherence, in brain coherence, who are meditators, who are calm, who are centered, their brain rhythms and their heart rhythms naturally attune to these solar system-sized electromagnetic fields that are happening all around us all the time. Not only that, in Mind to Matter, I make the assertion that when you are attuned to these huge planetary cycles, you're also attuned to everyone else who's also attuned to those cycles. So now we have potentially millions of people meditating, getting into heart coherence, being in a state of self-love together. And these people are able to produce large-scale effects. So this starts to explain things like telepathy, synchronicity, clairvoyance, distant healing. Because if we're all attuned to each other in this way, then when I shift my state here in California, and someone else is shifting their state in New York, or Paris, or Bangkok, or Beijing, then we're all in sync together. And what you find is that the number of synchronicities in your life starts to rise. So people who are attuned in this way have more clairvoyance, more telepathy, more synchronicity, more of all of these things happening in their lives because they're all in sync together with these huge planetary cycles.
Are you telling me that psychic intuition is real, scientifically speaking?
All of these things are real. They have been demonstrated in sometimes hundreds, sometimes thousands of studies. And we can actually show exactly how our thoughts become things in scientific terms. So absolutely.
Do you think it's really important to achieve this shift in consciousness to further develop our subtle senses, our psychic intuition?
I think it's important to develop these shifts in consciousness to save our planet, because right now we're headed, for a cliff with global warming, climate change, things like artificial intelligence. There's weaponized artificial intelligence. Every major country has it. If I lay down my artificial intelligence weapons, then another country is able to overwhelm me. So there's this huge arms race we're in cyber land. And so no country can afford to quit. Just like in the Cold War, no country could afford to unilaterally disarm its nuclear weapons. Now we're in the area of cyber weapons, and everyone's got them and looking for better ones to dominate everyone else. So those are just a few of the problems we face. Clean drinking water, high quality food. There are lots of problems we face. We have to make this shift to be able to face them. Now, the world is getting better rapidly. The world hasn't been getting rapidly better for a long time. Since 1900, the lifespan of the average global citizen has doubled. In the past 30 plus years, the average wealth of the average global citizen has tripled. The wealth of the average global citizen is 100 times greater today than it was in 1800. By every measure of human thriving, human rights have been improving, maternal mortality has been improving, infant mortality has been improving. In all these metrics, the world is becoming a better place, but we live on a finite planet. So how do we deal with these potential disasters that we face? The only way we do it is through consciousness. In my book, Bliss Brain, I'm talking about the whole idea of how we shift and how we can shift, and how as consciousness changes, our whole planetary future changes. Because in those bliss brain states you achieve in flow, in meditation, research shows that our productivity, our ability to get things done out there, quintuples. We have a 500% increase in productivity when we're in bliss brain, when we're in the awakened mind state of consciousness. So our productivity goes up a lot. According to a piece of research done by a branch of the US government, our ability to solve complex problems goes up by 490%. Our creativity more than doubles. So suddenly you have all these people on Earth, and they're thriving. And now we have 5 times the problem-solving ability, 5 times the productivity, double the creativity. In these states of consciousness, we can solve global problems we could not solve if we're in our old consciousness of being responsive to threats, of being pulled every which way by our emotions. If we're in the same brain our caveman ancestors were in, we need to get out of that brain, out of caveman brain, into bliss brain, into the awakened mind state. And then we have the creativity of millions of people being applied to these global problems, like weaponized AI, like global warming, like climate change. All of these problems are now soluble from that consciousness, and they were not at that lower consciousness. Albert Einstein said that every major scientific breakthrough is made through intuition. And so we don't make them by slogging away at the level of our limited human thinking, but we can imagine things, we can create things, we can evolve things in this expanded consciousness. We cannot evolve at our caveman consciousness. That's where we need to go as a species and individually.
On that note, looking at our emotions as a sort of GPS or guidance system, yes, they can trip us up, as we've talked about, and there are techniques we can use to overcome that. But can they also be the interface to the shift we so desperately need in the world?
Absolutely. And when you meditate, you are filled with a sense of bliss if you do it right. In deep meditation, your emotions are engaged, and they're positive emotions. When you have all that serotonin, and dopamine, and anandamide, and oxytocin, all these wonderful bliss chemicals in your brain, you feel absolutely wonderful. Now, what then happens is you trigger neural plasticity in a positive way. In my book, Mind to Matter, I have the example of a man called Graham Phillips. And in chapter 1 of Mind to Matter, I talk about Graham Phillips. Graham Phillips went on an 8-week meditation journey, but he had his brain measured just pixel by pixel by a team at Monash University beforehand. Then after meditating for 8 weeks, being mindful for 8 weeks, he had it measured again. And they found that the emotional regulation part of his brain, a part called the dentate gyrus, had grown by 22.8% in 8 weeks. That means his capacity to be calm and peaceful in a frustrating meeting, standing in line, stuck in traffic when someone says something annoying to him. Now he has 22.8% more hardware around emotional regulation in only 8 weeks. So we aren't just feeling better subjectively, we're actually growing the neural hardware to make us much, much, much happier. If you can do that in 8 weeks, what could you do in 8 months or 8 years? So after a while, you start to meditate, you start to tap, do all these things at the level of energy, change your energy, and now you're growing new neural hardware. You start to feel wonderful every day. You reset your set point for all these neurotransmitters to where you want to feel wonderful every day. So it's no longer a chore, a sweat to meditate. Now you're drawn into it. In fact, you're addicted to it because you have all this serotonin and dopamine. You're getting all these good neurochemicals. Your brain's full of anandamide. You feel totally blissed out and wonderful. Now you're highly motivated to seek those states as the new normal. And you go from being that annoyed, irritable, negatively emotional person to being a source of positive emotion. Now, when you do that, you produce a phenomenon called emotional contagion, and you produce that all around you. Research shows that if you're a happy person, your next door neighbor who lives in the house next to you is 34% more likely to be happy. He's about then to produce emotional contagion in people around him, and the person who he has contact with is about 15% happier, and the person that person has contact with is about 9% more happier. So emotional contagion is spreading all the way around you, and you're then an agent of emotional contagion to people you don't even know in the world. In one Facebook experiment I talk about in my book Mind to Matter, the experimenters tweaked the feeds of Facebook users slightly to make them either slightly more negative or slightly more positive. Within 2 weeks, those people had produced emotional contagion in almost 700,000 other people. That's the effect of getting happier, of going into Bliss Brain, of going into happiness, of that awakened mind state that I talk about in Mind to Matter. If you're in that state, you aren't in that state for you. You're producing emotional contagion for hundreds of thousands of people you don't even know, and that's how the world gets to be a better place.
I'm definitely going to get addicted to meditation. You have the best laugh, by the way.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Do my emotions actually create my reality?
Your emotions create your reality in profound ways, and they create your reality biochemically inside your body. They also create your reality externally to you. So when, for example, I have a bad experience, say, for example, I'm walking in the park near my house over here, and there is another person walking toward me, and he has a giant dog on a leash. And suddenly, this giant dog breaks away from his master, runs toward me, barking, and its jaws are full of saliva and it's drooling, and it looks like it's about to attack me. Now, even as I say this to you today, I can feel my cortisol and adrenaline rising. There is no dog here. I'm just making this up. And I'm having a rise in these chemicals, these stress chemicals like cortisol and adrenaline. Now, over time, high cortisol results in reduced bone density, reduced muscle mass, increased skin wrinkling, a loss of function in the learning and memory centers of the brain. All these bad effects are from high cortisol. And I can do it when there's no dog. I can do it by consciousness alone. I'm creating molecules in my body by telling you that story just by thought alone. Thought allied to emotion, negative emotion, is producing negative consequences, negative molecules in my body. When I, though, meditate, say I talk to you about happy things, right now we're having an inspiring conversation, and I'm generating all kinds of bliss molecules in my body, and I'm feeling really good. I make these molecules just by thoughts, by positive thoughts, by negative thoughts alone. We are making those molecules in our body, and I'm doing this every moment of the day, by the quality of my thoughts, by the quality of my emotions. Now, what happens cumulatively is really interesting. In one of the studies I talk about in Mind to Matter, The researchers compared the lifespans of optimists to those of pessimists. And optimists had an average 8 years of greater lifespan than pessimists. That's the cumulative difference of your lifespan of your thoughts and your emotions. So if I'm driving my cortisol high every day by thinking negative thoughts, by having a gloomy and pessimistic take on the world, then it may not seem to be a terribly bad thing to be thinking one negative thought. But think that negative thought over and over and over again, trigger neural plasticity in your brain around that neural pathway, and then that becomes the brain hardware of your body. In people with PTSD, the learning and memory centers of the brain, the hippocampus, can literally calcify. It literally produces calcium deposits on those memory learning centers of your brain. And you want calcium in your bones. You want calcium in your teeth. You want calcium in those parts of your body. You definitely don't want your memory learning centers to be calcifying, to be ossifying, becoming bone. So you're becoming a bonehead. If you are doing this regularly, and you don't want that. You want to have those memory learning centers growing. And so optimism, joy, happiness, connection with the universe, altruism, kindness, compassion, all of these things are triggering positive neural plasticity in our brains and making us much happier in time. Now we are resilient because the software of mind has become the hardware of brain. When you're faced with a disaster, when you're faced with a problem, when you're faced with a challenge in life, now you are strong, you're resilient, you have the inner ability, the inner hardwiring to meet those challenges. 2 years ago, almost now, it was October 9th of 2017, and my wife shook me awake. I looked at the alarm clock. It said 12:45 p.m. I looked out the window. There was a glow on the horizon, and I knew that meant trouble. I got out of bed. I walked out onto the deck outside our bedroom. I saw a wildfire sweeping down the hill opposite us toward our house. And I said to my wife very loudly, "We're getting out of here right now." The alarm clock went dead. The electricity died in the house. I rushed through the house. I threw on some clothes, grabbed my car keys. We sprinted out to the car, drove out as the flames were reaching that area. The wildfire was traveling, we later learned, it was traveling the length of a football field every 3 seconds. So as we drove out, my wife felt heat on her head, and she looked up through the moonroof of the car, and all the branches above her were on fire. We drove extremely fast out of the area. When we got about 3 miles away, I realized we were safe. We then went to my ex-wife's house. She lives 3 miles away. And we just made sure her family was safe. That was our next step. And then I leaned on the horn in their neighborhood and woke everybody up to make sure that they were all aware of the wildfire. We watched the house burn as the fire then crested the top of the hill about a mile away. It was this beautiful, huge luxury mansion. And we watched as the fire just went around the house, and then eventually it ringed the house, but it left the house unscathed. But then one Eve caught, and then another Eve caught. And in seconds, the whole house went up in flames. It was noisy that night. There were propane tanks exploding. There were gas tanks exploding. It was like listening to an artillery barrage. It was so loud. And we just got out of that situation. We survived. But by seconds, we got out of that. And so over the next few days, we were disoriented. We were trying to recover. The fire had wiped out 5,300 homes that night. And so, but we were resilient. We meditated. We got back into our bodies. We became resourceful. A week later, I was keynoting a conference in Canada, and I was teaching a week-long seminar on psychological trauma to therapists. A week later.
Wow, that's unbelievable. And you credit the power of meditation?
Meditation and tapping.
And tapping.
Yeah. Now, I needed therapy. I mean, I wasn't like, I needed help from my friends to bounce back. But we bounced back so quickly because we were resilient. We'd grown that part of our brains. We had the neural hardware to have perspective, in fact, 3 days after the fire, we were meditating, and we were cracking jokes about all the stuff we'd lost that we didn't want anymore. Like I had an old massage chair in the garage that I was supposed to list on eBay and sell. And so for 2 years, it had been on my to-do list, list the massage chair on eBay, which is cluttering up the whole garage. And it's like, I get to cross that off my list. We were making jokes about all the trash we had that we didn't have to worry about anymore. So we were resilient, and we could only have that perspective because we'd grown that neural hardware through years of meditation.
On a practical note, do you think neurofeedback is also effective?
Neurofeedback's brilliant. Okay. Biofeedback, the things I talk about, I have 30 practices in Mind to Matter that I recommend. Grounding, earthing is one of them. EFT is essential. Meditation is powerful. Neurofeedback, biofeedback, time in nature, time with people who make you feel wonderful. If you have people in your life who drag you down, get rid of them. Don't spend time with them. There's no obligation to spend time with people who pull you down. Find ones that lift you up, and then be agents of positive emotional contagion with people that lift you up and make you feel wonderful. All of these are practices that will help you. Spiritual practice is powerful. You want to spend time each day letting go of your anchoring and your identity in local mind. You need local mind. To drive to the store, I need local mind. To pay my bills, I need local mind. To give my wife a hug. To teach a class, I need local mind. Local mind is incredibly useful. But we are far more than local mind. And in meditation, we let go of our anchoring in local mind and we merge with non-local mind. What happens in the brain there is fascinating. The prefrontal cortex, the part of yourself that thinks you're you, right behind the forehead over here, that part of the brain drops in its activity. And the part of the parietal lobe that keeps us in the here and now, the amount of activity in the parietal lobe drops. Now, I no longer am wedded to thinking I am me. I'm no longer even aware of my time-space reality because my parietal lobe that generates that has gone dark. Now, suddenly, I'm merging with a far greater reality. I'm one with the universe, one with the cosmos. I feel one with everything, not just in a metaphorical way, in a literal way, because those parts of my brain that process time and space have dropped. The degree of their function drops by about 40%, which is a big, big drop. And now I'm no longer in local reality, in local mind. I am in non-local mind. I'm in Bliss Brain. I'm one with everything. Now, suddenly, I have perspective. I'm not thinking I'm a small, limited, local person dealing with local problems. I now have the unlimited resources of the universe to bring me solutions. I go out there into the cosmos, and there is knowledge, there is wisdom, there is love there. When I emerge from meditation in the morning, I am in tears much of the time because I feel my breath. I feel so grateful just to be alive. I feel so grateful to have a body, to have thoughts, to be able to be with people, to be on the planet. I feel so much love out there in the cosmos. When I come back here to my local mind, I don't know where to put it all. There's so much love. That's why I have to teach. I have to write books. I have to do blogs. I have to do broadcasts. I have to share that love because that non-local mind is so full of love for you. It wants you to have a wonderful life. And when you bring that back to your local mind, suddenly you are resourceful. You have thoughts you would never have thought in that limited local mind. You have ideas, and you have love for people around you that just blesses everyone around you. So it's a profound privilege to meditate, tune into non-local mind, and then you bring that back to your local reality. And that's when the magic happens. That's how transformation happens all around you in the world in practice. Like I have a nonprofit called the Veteran Stress Project. We've now offered EFT and tapping to over 20,000 veterans. That's practical. That's helping shift the needle on PTSD in the world. We've helped raise money for Rwandan orphans. We've helped people who were affected by the earthquake in Haiti. We're doing all these practical things. And that's very local, very practical. We aren't just spacing out there in meditation and feeling good. We're coming back here into local mind, and we're doing stuff that's really moving the needle. EFT was accepted as an evidence-based treatment by the whole US Veterans Administration hospital system. Why? Because of practical things we were doing to make that happen. So it's not just you're feeling good and you're blissing out in a cave in the Himalayas. You are bringing that back into solving social problems and personal problems and human suffering at a very basic level. So non-local mind is intensely practical and brings all that love of the cosmos back where the rubber meets the road in your local life, in your local reality.
Faith without works is dead.
Yeah.
So if there's this field out there that I'm feeding all the time, and Roland talks about what are you feeding the field, what's your emotional diet, then does it have effect on me? And how does that work? And we're kind of moving into the whole energetic web that we live in.
It does affect the whole web we live in. So we know now how if I change my consciousness, I'm creating molecules in my body, like stress molecules like cortisol and adrenaline, or rejuvenation molecules. I can be creating DHEA, I can be creating anandamide, the Bliss molecule. There are all kinds of molecules I can be creating in my own body, and that's not a hard thing to imagine. What, though, is harder for us to imagine is that we are creating molecules or affecting molecules outside of our bodies. And there's some very interesting studies of water. Now, water, of course, is composed of 3 molecules, a big oxygen atom and 2 little hydrogen atoms. And so what happens in these studies is that when people place intention into water, it changes the water. And this change can be seen when the water is used to water plants. So when that intentional water is used to water plants, they grow faster, they grow bigger, and they have more chlorophyll than plants watered with ordinary water. And that's what the research shows. But now, with some newer experiments, we can see what's actually happening to that water molecule. So the water molecule, again, has 1 big oxygen atom and 2 small hydrogens bonded, and this bonding angle between them is 104.5 degrees. And it is always 104.5 degrees. It was discovered many years ago, and that's just a fixed number in chemistry. 104.5 degrees is always the angle at which that water bonds. Except that when I take water and I hold water in my hands and I place the intention into the water of it healing, this bonding angle changes. And research shows that after intention, that bonding angle shrinks. It's different. The actual molecular structure of the water changes. Not only that, but people who can do this can often do it at a distance. So when they're intending for that water, and that water is in the next room, or in some experiments, 1,000 kilometers away, the bonding angle of the water changes. So research that I summarize in my book, Mind to Matter, shows that human beings can affect all 4 of the fundamental forces of physics. Now, there are 4 forces in physics, and they are immutable laws. So that's why they are the 4 forces of physics. And so they shouldn't be changeable. Like gravity should not be changeable. Electromagnetism should not be changeable. The strong nuclear force that holds the atoms together should not be flexible. The rate of radioactive decay, that's the 4th force, should not be changeable. So the rate of radioactive decay of uranium, of cesium, of plutonium, of francium, all of these radioactive substances is completely fixed. It's so stable that scientists use atomic clocks to measure time for experiments. They need a totally fixed number of what constitutes a second or an hour or a day. And the substance used in those atomic clocks is often cesium. And cesium's rate of atomic decay is stable to within 1 second every 4 million years. That's a very stable number. And yet research shows that certain people who are energy masters, who have highly coherent brain function and body function, when they have the intention that a radioactive substance changes its rate of decay, they can make it speed up and they can slow it down purely by intention in an energy field. So we can change electromagnetism. There's evidence we can change gravity. We can change the strong and the weak nuclear force. In one study, researchers had a healer projecting healing into mice who had cancer. So the setup was, there were 2 rooms at the university. The control mice were in the red room, and the experimental mice were in the green room. And so the rooms were the same. Both groups of mice had cancer. When mice get this kind of cancer, they die in about 21 days. And so the healer's job was to project energy at a distance only into the mice in the green room. Now, under that cage of mice, there was a device there that measured the field in the room, the electromagnetic field in the room under both cages of mice. And then at random intervals during the day, the researcher was sending a signal via a pager to the healer to send healing intention, but only into the green room, the mice in the green room. And that's what happened. Those mice got better. The mice in the red room died. The mice in the green room got better. And at the exact moments, at those random intervals, when the healer sent energy into those mice in the green room, the field in that room fluctuated by around 20%. Now, we should not be able to affect electromagnetism. It's a force of physics. We should certainly not be able to do that at a distance, and yet we can, purely by intention.
That takes the law of attraction to a whole new level, because forget about the Lamborghini or whatever it is, somebody might want to manifest. What about, nuclear war? What about, world peace? What about tackling these real problems?
Absolutely. And that's what we want to do. We want to have all that creativity, productivity, and problem-solving ability on steam to tackle those big global problems. And again, research shows that when we are in these mentally coherent states of flow, we get to a meditation, our ability to do that dramatically increases, and we begin to affect the world around us.
So now I want to move into the field of epigenetics. Another one of your, areas of study, extensive study. How can our feelings affect our genetic expression? Does it turn on or off our DNA?
Our thoughts, especially emotional thoughts, are affecting our gene expression. And in Mind to Matter, I trace the effects of the brainwaves you generate in meditation on your body and down to the level of the genes. And it turns out that in those deep states of meditation, you generate a lot of certain kinds of waves. A lot of delta waves, our slowest wave, and a lot of gamma, our fastest brain wave. And those gamma waves and those delta waves are doing things inside our bodies. They're literally turning genes on and turning genes off. And one study, for example, found that when we're in those deep states of flow, that the brain waves we generate are lengthening our telomeres. Those are our main anti-aging marker. If you have longer telomeres, you live longer. Stressed people have shorter telomeres, and so it's literally affecting our telomere length. It's affecting our stem cells. The frequencies you generate in meditation affect three things to do with stem cells. They affect stem cell proliferation. That means the number of stem cells. And you want your stem cells to be dividing and have lots of stem cells, because stem cells are blank cells. They can become nerves, bones, muscles, skin, and you want to have lots of these for cell repair and rejuvenation. So they're literally causing mitosis. They're causing the division of stem cells. One stem cell becomes two stem cells in those frequencies. Secondly, they are affecting the movement of stem cells. You want stem cells to migrate to the sites of your body where you need them. And so other frequencies generated in meditation are triggering stem cell migration. The third thing you're doing with those frequencies is stem cell adhesion. You want them to stick to damaged tissue and repair it. So all three of those things are generated simply by consciousness, by our brainwaves. Now, in one study of EFT tapping, which again uses acupressure and changes the meridian flows in the body, and one study of EFT found that a 1-hour EFT session changed the expression of 72 genes. And these weren't just any old genes. These were genes that did things like suppress cancer tumors, specifically prostate cancer, breast cancer, throat cancer, bowel cancer. All of those genes that suppress those cancers were being upregulated by just 1 hour of EFT. It was affecting the genes that create memory and learning in the brain and helping them conduct signals better. It was turning up genes that protect our skin from the sun's ultraviolet radiation. It was affecting genes to do with fertility, with metabolism. 72 genes upregulated by just 1 hour of an energy therapy like EFT tapping. So that's the effect that these energy therapies are having on the matter of our bodies.
If it's so incredibly impactful, why aren't we all doing this all of the time? But it's true, it does seem like we really undervalue or perhaps underestimate the power of emotional regulation.
I was at a big cancer clinic a few years back, walking through the oncology ward, and there's a place where patients go after chemotherapy and radiation, they go to a recovery room, and there's a big glass window there so the nurse can see them. As we walked past that huge glass window covering half the floor in the cancer clinic, and the nurse said to me, you know, Dawson, it's my dream that one day we'll walk past this window and we'll see a patient tapping. And I said to her, that's not my dream at all. My dream is we'll walk past that window someday and see every patient tapping. Because why not? You know, when you know that we can heal PTSD, research shows that 90% of veterans who get EFT, they have huge improvements in symptoms like flashbacks, nightmares, intrusive thoughts, hypervigilance, and so on. And so when 9 out of 10 people lose those symptoms, why not use it? These therapies are simply too good to remain on the shelf.
Do you think we're all walking around with cortisol overwhelm?
Most people are walking around with high levels of stress, unnecessarily high levels of cortisol, and these problems can be solved by meditation and tapping.
Now, if we take that to the global level again and look at ascension, I want to look at that and we'll look at sentience as well. So do you believe that achieving this shift in consciousness is possible to take Earth as a planet to another dimension?
I believe that within this century and within my lifetime, very possibly, everything is going to change. We're in the middle of a huge planetary leap in well-being. Law will change, politics will change, education will change, music will change, art will change, health will change, education, every single realm of human endeavor is in the middle of a tectonic, enormous transformation. And we will not be the same people on the same planet a few decades from now that we are today. Because Bliss Brain is addictive to the individual human being. We know through emotional contagion, it's contagious to people, and we're going to be getting much, much better. We're already in an unprecedented era of human flourishing. Over the last 30 years, the average global citizen has become 3 times as wealthy. Our lifespan has doubled since 1900. The average global citizen today is 100 times as wealthy as that person was in 1800. Infant mortality has been dropping. Maternal mortality has been dropping. Human rights have been improving. The number of people killed in wars in the 20th century, and this includes World War I and World War II, was fewer than in the 19th century. And the 19th century was more peaceful than the 18th century. 500 years ago, wars between global powers, and global powers are those able to project force beyond their borders. 500 years ago, wars between global powers were continuous. Today, there hasn't been one for 70 years, and they're unthinkable. So in all these measures of human thriving, our lives are improving, and we've just gotten started. Now, Bliss Brain, meditation, the awakened mind pattern I talk about in my books, is now producing evolved states of consciousness and is producing changed brain hardware. Think about your dog or your cat or your pet salamander. They cannot change their brains by intentionality alone, but we can. And we know from research that when we do this, when we meditate, when we tap, when we use energy to improve our mood, it's producing changes in our brains after just a few weeks. After a few months and a few years, we are radically remodeling the gray and white matter inside our skulls. We're becoming whole different people, and we're not doing it in evolutionary epochs. Darwin, in his book, he said that the scale of evolution, the span of evolution, takes so many lifetimes, so many millennia, that no human being will ever see it in their lifetime. He was wrong. We're evolving our brains in real time by our thoughts, by our emotions, by our spiritual experiences, and we're then using those brains to change the world around us. So we are literally evolving our bodies and our brains with every thought and every emotion and every spiritual experience we have. We're evolving our brains in real time, and we can measure those changes in 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks. Now, after 10,000 hours of those practices, people's brains change radically. There is a 400% change in people's brains between the 20,000 hour meditation and the 40,000 hour level of meditation. There is a their amygdala becomes 400% less sensitive. In other words, they're dramatically more resilient at that advanced meditation level than they are at the initial meditation level. So we keep on changing our brains throughout our lifetime. And so now we are this new species emerging with radically changed brains, radically changed bodies, radically changed world. And we're doing it not over the course of millennia by random mutation in a Darwinian sense. We're doing it moment by moment with every thought we think, and the effects show up in our bodies immediately, they show up in our lifetimes, and we are in a radically different world very soon. I expect that in my lifetime, I will be able to board a plane without going through security. The thought of injuring another human being will be so foreign to people that will be impossible. I believe that I'll have grandchildren and great-grandchildren that won't know anyone with PTSD. Now we know lots of people are traumatized, have anxiety and depression. The research shows we have the tools to dramatically reduce all of those mental health issues. So I think we're going to be cleaning up PTSD, cleaning up anxiety, cleaning up depression, simply with these energy tools we have right now. That'll lead to a whole new global consciousness, very different bodies, different brains, and a whole different world. Yeah, so in one study, the researchers looked at people meditating for 12 minutes a day. 12 minutes a day for 8 weeks. That's hardly any time at all. And brain changes were already visible in their brains after only 8 weeks. 12 minutes a day for 8 weeks. That's how quickly, when you start acquiring these awakened mind states, when you start using your consciousness and directing your attention intentionally, that's how fast your brain starts to change. After 8 months, after 8 years, it changes a lot. You then get to live in a happy new brain, and you feel way better yourself. You then become an agent of emotional contagion all around you. You begin to change the world. That's how we transform.
You talk about the noosphere, the psychosphere, and the emosphere.
Yes.
Can you define those terms for me?
The Teilhard de Chardin was a great philosopher and a Jesuit priest in the 1950s. So he called it the sphere of all mental activity on the planet. And so there, just as we have an atmosphere and a stratosphere, we have these rings around the planet. We have a noosphere, we have an emosphere. And the emosphere of the planet, I think, is shifting. As we have more happy people, more peaceful people, we're putting that into the field, and suddenly that emosphere is becoming brighter. There's less suffering. As we deal with our own emotional suffering, as we produce emotional contagion around us, we then are affecting that whole emosphere, and it gets happier. And so children now are being born into a less traumatized world than they were born into a century ago or 2 centuries ago. And then untraumatized people produce less trauma around them. And so we're becoming happier as our brains are changing. That's affecting the whole emotional content of the emosphere, and it's changing the world we live in.
Just a nuts and bolts question. What creates our emotions? Is it a chemical response in the body?
People think of thought and emotion as being insubstantial, but thought and emotion is actually physical, because a thought is a firing of a neural pathway in my brain, and it's a collection of neurochemicals like serotonin and dopamine and acetylcholine. All of these are neurotransmitters in my brain. So thoughts and emotions are physical in that sense, producing changes. And so when I say I feel love, what I feel actually is I feel certain chemicals. I feel oxytocin that's going on in my brain, in my body. I have anandamide happening. I have serotonin happening. So all of these things are chemical reactions, and they're neurological reactions, as well as what we think of as insubstantial thoughts and emotions.
What is sentience to you?
We live in a conscious universe. And it's not like there's consciousness out there and then we're physical beings down here. And consciousness is certainly not the product of complex brains. Complex brains are the product of consciousness. And when you tune into that consciousness, that universal consciousness in meditation, you feel the boundaries of self dissolving, and you're one with that great universal mind. So that is sentience. Consciousness is throughout the whole universe. The universe itself is consciousness. Consciousness is the fundamental principle of the universe. So we talk about the 4 forces of physics, but there's a 5th force. And that force is consciousness. And there's research showing that consciousness can affect all 4 of the 4 fundamental forces of physics. So you change your consciousness, and then the world around you starts to change. But consciousness is central to everything.
Do we live in a participatory universe?
We live in a participatory universe because as we change ourselves, we're changing the field. As we tune into the field is changing us. When I sit there in meditation and I let go of my small local consciousness, so I think I'm Dawson Church. I think I'm wearing a red shirt. I think it's a summer day or a spring day. I think I live in California. I'm thinking this local self, this local world. When I close my eyes, meditate, and release my awareness into non-local mind, I'm suddenly aware that I'm far more than this small local reality. I then blend with infinite non-local reality. I then am influencing that because that now has a vehicle through which it can act and speak and have an effect on the material universe, on the material world we live in. Then I bring my problems to that great source of knowledge. So now I'm not just this little human being trying to figure it out down here in local mind. I'm surrendering to non-local mind, and I surrender to non-local mind, and non-local mind has ideas and has visions and has connections that just flood my brain. I'm far more resourceful than I would have been at the level of local mind. So it's a feedback loop, and we're affecting it, and it is affecting us.
The title of the documentary is called Deconstructing Sentience. What are we deconstructing to get to our pure sentient consciousness?
We come with a brain that has been built by 4 billion years of evolution. And it's evolved in a certain way to handle threats. And so the average person has a big chunk of their brain devoted to threat assessment and response. In fact, when you close your eyes and try and meditate, very often you just think about problems. You have monkey mind hopping from issue to issue, past problems, future problems, because that's the way the brain has evolved to deal with the world. Now, that was really useful to your ancestors. We have 2 networks in our brains. One is the task positive network. When I'm doing a task, when I'm focused on, for example, skiing, when I'm balancing my checkbook, when I'm writing my blog, when I'm relating to other people, then my task positive network is on. But when my task positive network shuts off, when I close my eyes to meditate, when I'm relaxing, then the default mode network kicks on. And it's one part of the brain back here called the PCC, posterior cingulate cortex, part of the frontal lobe kicks on. That's the default mode network, and that's the network the brain defaults to when you aren't doing a task. Now, the default mode network does 2 things. It evolved to do 2 things. Why would the brain, what is the brain going to do most usefully when it has spare capacity? And what it does is it does 2 things. One is it thinks about the bad stuff of the past, because your ancestor needed to remember the tiger that may have eaten him, trying to eat him yesterday. And the second thing it does is it projects it out into the future, the tiger that might eat me tomorrow. So for your ancestor 100,000 years ago, it was really useful to have a brain that focused on bad things in the past and bad things that might happen in the future. And that's what the default mode network does spectacularly well. The trouble is, in a world without tigers attacking us, we now have all this threat assessment machinery in our brains, the default mode network, and it defaults to that. That's what your brain does. It remembers the insult you got a year ago or in your childhood. It remembers all the bad stuff of the past and thinks what might happen in the future. And that does not make for a happy brain or a happy mind. So that's the brain you were born with. And that's the trap most people are in. They're just running their default mode network all their lives and never having inner peace, driving their cortisol sky high, having a poor quality of life, stressing themselves out purely by thought, by consciousness, by imagination. So what you have to do is you have to evolve your brain. You have to learn to meditate in an efficient way that calms the default mode network. Now, what happens is that when you meditate regularly, there are 2 pieces of the brain right down here. One is called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, or DLPFC. One is called the ventromedial PFC, because it runs and it connects this part of the brain, the PFC, with the emotional brain, the limbic system, and it calms it. And so when those parts of the brain are active, first of all, they start to grow. And they get bigger and bigger and bigger in meditators. After a while, you can effortlessly calm the default mode network, close your eyes, and be in Bliss Brain right away. You want that state. Now, you're not just in caveman brain. You're not in threat mode. You're not in reactivity mode to what happens around you. So bad things happen, but you remain calm. I was at a conference recently, and I was at a restaurant, and there was a whole group of people around the table in the restaurant. And the waiter tripped and dropped a whole platter of crockery and cutlery. So there was this big explosion as all these fragments of glass and plates were flying all over the place. And you could tell the meditators around the table, because we all just sat there completely calm. Whereas the people who weren't meditators were like, oh my goodness, what's going on there? They were startled. They had a high startle response. In meditators, after a while, not only does that threat assessment machinery stay calm, it literally begins to atrophy. The amygdala, the brain's fire alarm, literally atrophies in people who use the practices I advocate in Mind to Matter. It starts to literally shrink and shrivel up because it's not being used. So all that caveman brain equipment in your brain, that all that hardwiring you had when you were born, all that ability to scan the environment and detect threats, you're not using it, so it starts to atrophy after a while. And all the parts of the brain to do with happiness, you've been lighting them up in meditation over and over and over again, they begin to grow. And suddenly, you don't just have a happier mind and a happier life, you have a happier brain, a resilient brain. So when you have the fire that sweeps through your neighborhood and takes away your house, when you have the financial crash, when you have the divorce, or when you have your child acting out, or when you have an illness, you now are resilient because you've built a brain that's designed for happiness. And then you're a much happier person. You help make a much happier world. So we are literally changing our brains by doing this and giving ourselves a brain to live in for the rest of our lives that is at peace, that's basically looking for joy, that's oriented to joy, that's attracting other people of high emotional tone. And so we get to live our whole lives then in synchronicity, in connection with other people, in compassion, in love, and your life just then is filled with so much love and so much happiness and so much joy, you just can't help but spread it all around you because it's overflowing through this new brain that you built in connection with that non-local mind.
Wow, that's incredible, Dawson Church.
I mean,
A man with so much wisdom.
Even as I'm saying this, I'm just like boggling my own mind that we're doing this. I mean, no species has ever been able to create its own brain before, and we can. And it starts in 8 weeks of meditation. It's just like mind-blowing. And
It is mind-blowing.
so as we're deconstructing the mind and the brain we were born with, that caveman brain, we're reconstructing it as Bliss Brain. We're reconstructing it for joy, for happiness, and for compassion. As we fill our lives with this, as we fill our thoughts with this, as this becomes our emotional reality, it literally becomes the structure of our brains.
Is there a blueprint, Dawson?
I think we're making up a new blueprint. I think that evolution, I think we're probably amusing Mother Nature, and we are blowing her mind by what we're doing. I think we've thrown out the blueprint. I mean, if you just look at 4 billion years of evolution by random mutation, it's just been changing like this. There is a part of evolution called the Cambrian explosion that biologists look at, and in that period, all these new life forms appeared really quickly by evolutionary terms. But that was 4 million years. They think of that as really rapid evolution. Now we can do it in our own brains in a few weeks. So we're evolving that quickly. And so I think we're probably amusing Mother Nature, probably scaring her. This is an experiment where we've thrown out the Darwinian blueprint of evolution by random mutation over very long epochs of time, being able to evolve our bodies, evolve our brains in real time with every thought, with every emotion, with every meditation session. We're literally shifting not just our conceptual reality, we're shifting our physical reality as well.
Is our sentience a creational force?
Sentience is a privilege. To wake up in the morning and be sentient, to be awake, be alive, be conscious, and then take responsibility for directing your attention so that you are now not just at the mercy of what's happening around you. You are the creator of what happens around you. You know that people wake up, and research shows that most people, within moments of waking up, they're checking their wireless mobile device. And what they're now doing is they're using this precious gift of sentience, and they're filling it with information from the outside world, much of which is unpleasant. So then they feel bad because they're waking up, and the first thing they're doing is they're using the power of attention to select negative input. You don't want to do that. You want to wake up in the morning, and the first thing you want to do is fill your awareness with the love, the compassion, the joy of the non-local universe. Then you're choosing to be sentient, and you're choosing to direct it consciously in a way that fills your body with health, that fills your mind with wisdom, that fills your cells with intelligence, and that orients you that larger picture of compassion and joy, which is the truth of where we are. You then move into the world, not taking your input from the outside world. You're taking your input from the universe, and you're flowing that then into your outside world in the form of joy and compassion and imagination and creativity and play. That's the kind of life you want to have.
That is brilliant, Dawson Church. Thank you so much. There's one more quote I wanted to hear you say. You say, "We are members of a community of artists painting our world into existence moment to moment."
We are members of a community of artists painting our worlds into existence moment by moment by our thoughts, by our beliefs, and by our inner states.
Dawson Church, thank you so much for your wisdom and your time today. That was an enlightening, mind-boggling interview, and I am truly grateful for your contribution.